It was 2 o'clock in the morning in Ouagadougou. Phones screamed through the night. Screens flashed with a single brutal message. French banks freeze transfers. IMF suspends loans. CFA, franc, collapsing. 70 years of chains tightened in one night. Money that Africans earned, stolen in an instant from vaults in Paris. Independence, a lie written on paper. Real power still in foreign hands. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood in the palace, fists clenched, eyes burning. Around him, ministers whispered fear. Suicide. They called his plan liberation. He answered, how can a nation be free if it cannot even print its own money? This was no accident. It was punishment. A reminder that Africa's wealth, Africa's labor, Africa's very future remained hostage to Europe's approval. And yet, in that suffocating room, something cracked. A coin, gleaming, with Burkinabe gold, landed on the table. The last chain of colonization was about to snap. The question was no longer if, it was when, and the night the West tried to break Burkina Faso was the night Burkina Faso decided to break free. What do you think about this turning point? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. And if you believe Africa's story must be told, don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey. For decades, Burkina Faso had been described with one word: poor, a landlocked country, dependent on aid, forgotten on world maps. That was the story outsiders told, but those who lived here knew another truth. Beneath the dry soil lay gold, tons of it, enough to build schools, hospitals, railways, and entire industries. Yet year after year, the gold left on foreign plains, profits siphoned to banks in Europe, while the people remained trapped in scarcity. Every African elder knew the weight of the CFA franc, a currency designed in Paris, controlled in Paris, stored in Paris. Every time an African government printed a note, it had to deposit dollars with the French treasury. Imagine that, paying to use your own money. Imagine building wealth with your own hands, only to beg permission to touch it. This was not economics. This was a chain, a colonial shackle polished and renamed. Ibrahim Traoré had seen enough. He was a soldier, yes, but also the son of farmers who knew hunger, who knew what it meant to toil in the sun, while profits flowed elsewhere. His rise to power was not an accident. It was the eruption of a question buried too long. Who really owns Africa? That night, in the dim light of the presidential office, the question burned hotter than ever. The International Monetary Fund thought they had cornered him. French banks thought they could starve his people into submission. Western media was already preparing the headlines. Burkina Faso collapses. A failed experiment. Another African tragedy. But something else was brewing. For months, quietly, secretly, Ibrahim and a handful of trusted allies had been planning an answer. They called it Operation Sankara, in honor of the revolutionary leader murdered in 1987 for daring to dream of a self-sufficient Africa. Sankara's ghost still walked in every Burkinabe street, reminding people of the price of silence. That file, resting on the table, held blueprints for a weapon no army could match. A new currency, forged from the country's own gold, powered by digital technology, untouchable by Paris or Washington. To the frightened ministers, it seemed madness. To Ibrahim, it was destiny. Because this story is not just about economics. It is about dignity. It is about whether Africans will forever kneel for permission or whether they will finally stand. And as dawn approached over Ouagadougou, with city lights fading into the first glow of morning, a simple but seismic question hung in the air. What happens when one African nation decides to fight not with guns, but with its own money? That is the question we follow tonight. So, keep listening, because what you are about to hear is not just Burkina Faso's story. It is the story of every African who has ever wondered why freedom feels unfinished. The palace was never quiet, but that night it felt like a battlefield, disguised as an office. Phones rang without pause. Papers shuffled, like restless whispers. Screens glowed with breaking headlines, each one more brutal than the last. French banks suspend transfers. IMF halts support. CFA franc Untersiege. It was not simply news. It was war. An invisible war launched without bullets. but aimed directly at the lifeline of a nation. At the head of the long table, Captain Ibrahim Traoré Sadrigit, his uniform catching the pale light of the lamps. His face was calm, but his clenched fists betrayed the storm inside. Around him, his ministers argued in rising tones. This is economic suicide. The finance minister said, sweat glistening on his forehead. His voice cracked under the weight of fear. We are too small, too poor. We cannot challenge Paris. We cannot abandon the CFA franc. Nobody has ever done it. Nobody. That word lingered in the air like smoke. Traoré's eyes moved slowly around the table. To the president of the central bank, Dr. Omina Konati, whose trembling hands betrayed her inner turmoil. To economy minister Ousmane Sonko, shifting uneasily in his chair, his lips pressed into silence. To the advisors who could not meet his gaze, their courage already wavering. At last he spoke, his voice low but steady. Then we will be the first. The room froze. Even the telephones seemed to pause in their relentless ringing. Traoré leaned forward, his knuckles pressing into the polished wood of the table. Tell me, Sonko, tell me, Konate, how can we call ourselves independent if we cannot even print our own money? The CFA franc is not currency. It is a chain, a colonial chain, polished to look like freedom. For 70 years we have worn it. Silence thickened the air. No one denied the truth. Everyone in that room had grown up under the shadow of the CFA franc. They knew the rule. For every note printed, dollars had to be deposited with the French treasury. A system designed not to liberate, but to bind. Dr. Konate finally spoke, her voice almost a whisper. Mr. President, we know you are right. But practically, what can we do? We have no printing presses, no infrastructure. And if the people wake tomorrow and rush to the banks, what then? Panic will destroy us faster than sanctions. Traoré reached under the table and placed a file before them. The ministers exchanged uneasy glances. None had seen this before. On the cover, stamped in bold letters, Operation Sankara. He opened it slowly, like unveiling a secret buried for decades. Inside lay blueprints, documents, and at the center, a coin. A single coin, gold-colored, catching the light like a flame in the dark. On one side, the proud outline of Burkina Faso. On the other, a baobab tree, ancient and unbreakable. Gasps rippled around the table. This, Traoré said, holding the coin between his fingers, is the Burkina gold, a currency backed not by promises in Paris, but by our own soil, our own hands, our own gold. The finance minister shook his head, disbelief painted across his face. Impossible. Our reserves are held abroad. Our mines are controlled by foreign companies. How can we? Not anymore. Traoré cut him off. His tone was calm, but his eyes burned. Even as we sit here, the army is moving. By dawn, the mines will be ours. Foreign executives escorted to the border. Our gold returned to us. We no longer ask permission. Sonko slammed his hand on the table. And what of sanctions? What of boycotts? They will crush us. Mr. President, they will cut us off from the world. Traoré smiled faintly, the kind of smile that unsettled more than it reassured. He pressed a button on the console beside him. A screen flickered on, displaying a world map. Certain countries glowed in red. Russia, China, Turkey, India, Brazil, Iran. For 6 months, he said, we have been negotiating quietly. Direct trade agreements. Gold for technology. Gold for energy. Gold for medicine. No dollars. No euros. No Paris. No Washington. They thought they held all the cards. They were wrong. The room erupted into overlapping voices. Shock. Fear. Amazement. Some ministers whispered prayers under their breath. Others stared at the coin, as if it were a weapon. Dr. Konate, eyes fixed on the coin, asked the only question that mattered. But will the people accept it? Traoré walked slowly to the window. Outside, the lights of Ouagadougou shimmered like distant stars. He clasped his hands behind his back, his posture, that of a man carrying not just a country, but a continent. They will, he said quietly, Because this is not paper. This is not illusion. It is value they can hold. For generations they have stored gold with jewelers, knowing it never loses worth. We are not asking them to trust us. We are giving them what is already theirs. He turned back, lifting the coin once more, so its surface caught the light. In that moment, it was not just a piece of metal. It was defiance. It was hope. It was fire. The ministers exchanged glances, their fear mingling with something else, something dangerously close to belief. And as the clock ticked toward dawn, the coin remained on the table, gleaming like a promise. The question that none dared to voice hung unspoken in the air. Was this the beginning of liberation or the first step toward ruin? History has a way of lingering, like smoke that clings to walls long after the fire is gone. For Burkina Faso, that smoke carried the name of Thomas Sankara, the young captain who had once promised self-reliance, who had banned luxury cars for ministers, who had planted millions of trees against the desert, who had dared to say, "He who feeds you, controls you." His voice had electrified a generation. His assassination in 1987 had silenced it, at least on the surface. But for those who grew up under his shadow, the silence never lasted. Ibrahim Traoré was one of them. As a boy in the dusty outskirts of Ouagadougou, he had listened to his father curse the CFA franc. His father was a farmer who sold cotton for pennies while foreign traders shipped it abroad for fortunes. "Our sweat waters their soil," the old man said. Yet, we cannot even buy medicine without asking Paris. For young Ibrahim, those words cut deeper than hunger. He saw the contradiction. Fields full of crops, yet tables empty at night. Gold buried beneath the earth, yet schools without books. Independence written in the constitution, yet chains engraved in the currency. By the time he joined the army, those contradictions had become a wound. In the barracks, older soldiers whispered about Sankara, how he had dreamed of breaking the CFA franc, how his plans had been buried with him. They spoke of betrayal, of neighbors who bowed to Paris for survival, and every time a soldier mentioned Sankara's name, Ibrahim felt a spark, a reminder that freedom was more than a flag. That night, in the presidential palace, as his ministers wrestled with fear, he felt Sankara's presence like a shadow at his back. He could almost hear the voice, "Do not beg for crumbs. Do not ask to be free. Take it." The CFA franc itself was not just currency. It was humiliation stamped in ink, created in 1945, tied directly to the French treasury. It forced African nations to deposit their reserves abroad. If Mali or Niger or Burkina Faso wanted to print a single note, they had to pay first. Generations of leaders had called it stability. But stability for whom? For the banks in Paris? For the politicians who lived in palaces while their people fetched water from wells? Traore knew this history like scripture. It was the reason he had prepared Operation Sankara in silence. Not even his closest allies knew the full plan. He had learned from Sankara's fate. Trust too widely, and betrayal will knock at your door. He trusted only the dead revolutionary whose picture hung in his office. Dr. Konate broke the silence. "The people," she said, "are tired." Yes, but tired people can break. If you push them into chaos, if salaries cannot be paid, if bread vanishes from markets, they will turn against you. Against all of us. Her words echoed the warnings of history. Leaders who had dared to challenge the CFA system often ended up isolated, overthrown, sometimes dead. Paris had many tools: sanctions, propaganda, even armies dressed as peacekeepers. And yet, across the table, Ibrahim's eyes burned, with something fiercer than fear. He remembered his own mother, selling handmade cloth in the market. She would sit for hours under the sun, bargaining with traders who always seemed to have the final word. "This cloth," she once told him, "was woven by my hands, but priced by theirs. One day, Ibrahim, you must learn whose hands set the value." That lesson had stayed with him long after she passed. So when the finance minister shook his head and muttered, "This is madness," Ibrahim almost smiled. Madness was watching your nation's gold locked away in Paris vaults. Madness was watching your youth risk their lives in the desert to migrate, while billions in resources left untouched. Madness was calling slavery stability. He walked across the room to the portrait of Sankara. The revolutionary's gaze seemed alive, steady, unwavering. Ibrahim stood still, feeling the weight of both history and expectation. Behind him, the ministers shifted nervously, unsure if they were witnessing the birth of salvation or the prelude to disaster. He spoke not to them, but to the memory that haunted the nation. His voice was a whisper, but in the silence it sounded like thunder. "Thomas," he said, eyes fixed on the portrait, "we finish your work tonight." The coin lay in the center of the table, small and silent, yet heavier than any weapon. Ministers leaned closer, unable to take their eyes off it. Its surface glowed with a dull, warm shine, the color of buried treasure finally unearthed. On one side, a map of Burkina Faso, sharp and proud. On the other, the silhouette of a baobab tree, roots spreading deep, branches reaching wide. A symbol older than colonization itself. "It is only a prototype," Traore said, turning it between his fingers. "But it is real, made from our own gold, refined on our own soil. Not paper, not illusion. Value you can touch." The ministers exchanged uneasy glances. For years, they had signed documents with numbers that never felt real. Loans, credits, reserves, all reduced to digits stored in accounts across the sea. Now, here was something tangible, something that belonged to them. And yet, the weight of fear lingered. The finance minister cleared his throat. "Mr. President, gold alone cannot sustain us. The world runs on banks, on transfers, on digital transactions. People will not line up to carry coins. They will want convenience, security." Traore placed the coin back in the file and slid another sheet across the table. Blueprints glowed under the dim light. Screens, codes, diagrams of a mobile application. "This," he said, "is the Burkina digital wallet. Every citizen will receive it. A phone in their hand becomes their bank. Transparent, secure, backed by gold. No Paris, no Washington, only us." Gasps filled the room. The idea was as terrifying as it was brilliant. Dr. Konate adjusted her glasses, scanning the designs. A mobile application, linked directly to reserves. A system beyond Western banks. If it works, it will bypass every chain they hold over us. She paused, her voice trembling. "But habits are iron. People trust paper, even when it is worthless. Will they trust this?" Traore looked at her steadily. "They already trust gold. Every family keeps it with jewelers. Every wedding ring carries it. We are not teaching them something new. We are giving them what they already believe in, made modern." For a moment, the room was quiet. The ministers studied the designs. Fear still clung to their faces, but beneath it flickered a dangerous light. Curiosity. Zongo broke the silence. "And the mines?" His voice was harsh. "You said the army has taken them. Is it true?" Traore nodded. "As we speak, French and American executives are being escorted to the border. The mines are no longer theirs. They are ours. Burkina's gold will serve Burkina." The words landed like a thunderclap. For decades, ministers had accepted that the mines were untouchable, guarded by foreign contracts and invisible power. To hear that they were now under Burkinabe control felt unreal, almost reckless. The finance minister's hands trembled. "If sanctions follow, our economy will collapse in days. No aid, no imports. The shelves will empty, and the people will not blame Paris. They will blame you." Traore's gaze sharpened. "Then let them blame me. But they will also remember who gave them back their gold, who broke the last chain." Konate reached for the coin, lifting it carefully as though it might burn her fingers. She held it to the light, her reflection shimmering on its surface. "It is beautiful," she murmured. "Beautiful, but dangereux. Freedom is always dangerous," Traore replied. The room felt charged, as if history itself had entered and was listening. Ministers shifted uneasily, some whispering prayers, others staring at the coin as if it might speak. Then, suddenly, a shrill ring cut through the silence.
It must be earned.
One of the secure lines on the table lit up, flashing red. The assistant rushed in, his voice tight with urgency. "Mr. President," he said, "the connection is ready." Traore turned from the window, his face unreadable. "Which connection?" asked Zongo. The assistant swallowed hard. 5 heads of state. Mali, Niger, Guinea, Togo, Benin. They are waiting to speak with you. The ministers froze, their fear colliding with a new realization. This was no longer only about Burkina Faso. The storm was spreading. Traore's hand rested on the coin, fingers pressing against the symbol of the baobab. He looked at his team, his voice low but steady. "Then let us see," he said. "How many are ready to break their chains with us?" The phone continued to ring. The red light on the secure line stopped flashing, but the tension it left behind lingered like smoke. Ministers sat in silence, each lost in private calculations. Outside, dawn crept over Ouagadougou, painting the horizon in pale orange. But inside the palace, the air remained heavy, suffocating. Dr. Omina Konate, president of the central bank, spoke first. Her voice was calm, but her words carried the weight of decades. "We may hold $400 million in reserves," she said, "but it is not here. It is in Paris, locked in their vaults. Even our gold, the 78 tons we are told belongs to us, sits under their watch. We cannot touch it without their blessing." The words stung. Everyone in the room knew the truth, but few had dared to say it aloud. For 70 years, West African nations had deposited their reserves in French accounts, a condition disguised as partnership. In return, Paris dictated monetary policy. It was a leash dressed as stability. Konate looked down at her hands, remembering her own journey. Trained in economics, educated abroad, she had once believed in the CFA franc as a shield against chaos. That was the story her professors told her. Stability, predictability, credibility. But living within the system had shown her something different. Stability for the bankers, predictability for Paris. For Africans, stagnation, poverty dressed in foreign suits. Her voice cracked. "I have signed documents all my career, papers filled with numbers that were not ours. Every calculation, every projection, tethered to a vault in another land. Do you know what it feels like to be the head of a central bank, and yet hold no keys?" The question landed heavy in the room. Even the skeptics lowered their eyes. Ibrahim Traoré did not flinch. "That is why we must act," he said. "They have kept us on our knees for generations. They believed fear would keep us quiet. But fear has an end. Tonight, it on, almost as if on cue. The door opened. A colonel stepped in, saluted sharply, and delivered his report. "Mr. President, all major gold mines are under our control. Foreign executives escorted out. No casualties." The room stirred with shock. The operation had been completed faster than anyone imagined. What was once fantasy was now reality. Konate's heart pounded. She thought of the headlines that would explode across European capitals by morning. "They will strike back," she whispered. "Sanctions. Blockades. They will use every weapon." "Of course," Traoré said calmly, "but to punish us, they must first reach us. And this time, we are not alone." In Paris, at that very moment, the French treasury was already in chaos. Screens glowed with alerts. Gold shipments halted. Executives expelled. Contracts shredded in an instant. The director of African operations shouted into his phone, his voice echoing through the marble halls. "This is not possible. A military coup is one thing, but taking the mines, nationalizing the reserves. They are children playing with fire," another official whispered back, pale with dread. "Children, perhaps, but children who have just stolen the matches." Back in Ouagadougou, Zongo still resisted. And what happens when markets collapse? When shelves are empty, will the people cheer for your coin then? "Mr. President, or will they curse your name?" Traoré leaned across the table, his voice like steel. "The people already live in hunger. Zongo, they already live in poverty. What do we risk losing chains? If they must choose between dying slowly in servitude or risking everything for freedom, I will give them the choice." The room fell silent again. Konate stared at the coin still lying on the table, glowing faintly in the weak dawn light. She thought of her father, who had once said, "Money is power." Amina. And in Africa, power has never lived at home. She had spent her career proving him right. But tonight, She wondered if Ibrahim Traoré was daring to prove him wrong. The colonel cleared his throat. "Mr. President," he said, "the mines are secure. What are your orders?" All eyes turned to Traoré. For a moment he stood still, his gaze fixed on the coin, his reflection shimmering in its surface. The ministers held their breath, waiting. Then he spoke, each word deliberate, like hammer strikes on iron. "Keep them. Guard them. From this moment, Burkina's gold will never again leave African soil." The ministers shifted uneasily, some whispering prayers, others already calculating their futures. The die had been cast. And yet, in the silence that followed, one truth pressed against every mind in the room. Paris would not let this stand. The sun had barely risen when the convoys rolled into the mining compounds, armored trucks painted in desert dust, soldiers stepping down with rifles slung across their shoulders, faces stern, silent. The foreign executives had been warned, orders signed in the middle of the night, stamped with the seal of the presidency. But none of them believed it until the gates rattled open and Burkinabe troops marched inside. At the largest site, a French director in a tailored suit stormed out of his office, fury written across his pale face. "This is illegal," he shouted, voice echoing over the yard. "You cannot do this. We have contracts, 20-year agreements, recognized by Paris." A Burkinabe officer met his anger with cold formality. "Your contracts are with a nation that has just taken back its sovereignty. You will leave peacefully." Now, the Frenchman's phone was already at his ear, calling Paris. Nearby, an American manager barked into his device, demanding to be patched through to Washington. They spoke quickly, in Bunit, words tumbling into the air like gunfire. Economic theft, Zeitzure, nationalisation, disaster. But panic changed nothing. Within hours, company cars were lined up at the gates. Executives escorted out with their briefcases clutched like shields. Some left in silence, others hurled insults. But all were powerless. For the first time in decades, the gold beneath Burkinabe soil was no longer leaving by foreign trucks. At the palace, ministers watched footage streaming from the compounds, soldiers replacing foreign guards, national flags raised above warehouses once branded with corporate logos. For some in the room, it felt like revenge. For others, it felt like suicide. Zongo muttered under his breath, "We have just declared war." "Doctor," Konate's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses. "They will not forgive this. The markets will turn against us. The banks will close their doors. By next week, our shelves could be empty." But Traore stood still, his eyes fixed on the images. "Let them close their doors," he said quietly. "We will build new ones." Across Europe, panic spread. In Paris, the Africa desk at the central bank scrambled for answers. "They are nationalizing," one official shouted, his voice cracking. "Do you understand? They are kicking out our companies." Overnight, in Washington, a State Department report landed on the secretary's desk before breakfast. Burkina Faso has seized multiple sites, French and American personnel removed. High risk of contagion to neighboring states. The word contagion lingered. The thought of Mali, Niger, Guinea following suit kept officials awake, phones buzzing through the night. By midday, Western media had found its headline, "Economic Suicide in West Africa. Traoré gambles with nation's future. Chaos begins in Ouagadougou." Footage of soldiers at mines played on loop, edited with grim commentary. Warning of collapse, starvation, riots. But in Ouagadougou's markets, the atmosphere was different. People gathered in circles, whispering the news. "The mines are ours," one man said. Disbelief, mixing with pride. For the first time, ours. A woman selling tomatoes pressed her hand to her chest. "May God protect him," she murmured. Back in the palace, fear still stalked the ministers. "Sanctions will be swift," Songo said, his voice rising. "Fuel, medicine, imports, they will cut us off. And when they do, it will not be Paris that suffers. It will be our people." Traore turned to him, calm as stone. "Our people already suffer. Zongo, do you think poverty arrived with my decision? No, it has been here for decades. But now, at least, the suffering has meaning. It has a purpose. He walked slowly to the table and spread out a map, its edges weighed down with files. The ministers leaned in. Puzzled. The map glowed with red markers. Moscow, Beijing, Ankara, New Delhi, Brasilia. Traore looked around the table, his voice low but sharp. For 6 months, he said, we have been preparing. We knew this day would come. While Paris believed us asleep, we built new doors, trade agreements, direct exchanges, gold for fuel, gold for medicine, gold for machines. No dollars, no euros, only us and them. The ministers stared at the map, disbelief, colliding with something else, something they were almost afraid to name. Hope. Traore placed his hand flat on the table. They thought cutting us off would break us. They never imagined we had already found another way. The room fell silent, the sound of history shifting like earth before an earthquake. The map remained open on the table, red markers glowing under the dim light. Moscow, Beijing, Ankara, New Delhi, Brasilia. Cities that, for decades, had been spoken of only in whispers among African leaders. Partners too dangerous to court openly. Friends who existed only in the shadows. Captain Ibrahim Traoré let his finger trace the map. His voice was steady, deliberate. Each word, like the stroke of a blade. These are the doors Paris cannot lock. They thought we were surrounded. But the world is larger than France. The ministers shifted uncomfortably. For generations they had been told there was no path outside Europe. Aid, loans, currency, stability. All roads led to Paris. To hear their president speak of new alliances felt like stepping onto unknown ground. Dr. Amina Konate leaned closer, scanning the files spread across the table. The contracts were short, but clear. Russia promised fuel and military equipment in exchange for gold shipments. China offered infrastructure and machinery bridges, railways, digital technology. India's commitments included agriculture, seeds, and life-saving medicines. Brazil pledged grain and food security programs. Turkey promised to send engineers to build schools and factories. Konate whispered, almost to herself, gold for food, gold for machines, gold for medicine. Not debt, not dependency. Exchange. Traore nodded. For the first time in 70 years, the price is ours to set. Usman Zongo slammed his palm on the table. And what if their price is higher than we expect? Do you believe Moscow, Beijing, Ankara are saints? They will take what they want, just as the French have. The president's eyes locked on him. Perhaps. But there is one difference. With Paris, we have no choice. With them, we do. If Russia demands too much, we turn to China. If China play tricks, we turn to India. We are no longer prisoners of one master. For once, the marketplace belongs to us. The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing against the walls. The secure line crackled to life. An aide hurried to connect the call. The voice that filled the room was deep, calm, unmistakably Eastern. Captain Traore, the man said, our government has received your confirmation. The first shipments are prepared. Your gold will be accepted. But listen to me carefully. Once you cross this line, you will not be forgiven. The West will hunt you. They will not stop until you are broken. The ministers froze. The voice spoke not with malice, but with the weary knowledge of history. Leaders had risen before, only to be cut down. Traore's reply was calm. They already hunt us. They already cut us off. Freeze our reserves. Starve our children. Tell me what is left to lose. The line was quiet for a moment. Then the voice returned. Softer. Your life. Your government. Courage is never enough. Africa is full of graves dug for men who thought otherwise. The call ended with a low hum, leaving the room heavy with the echo of the warning. Dr. Konate stared at her president, her hands folded tightly. She had spent her life balancing numbers, building forecasts, believing stability was the highest virtue. But now, for the first time, she saw a leader willing to embrace instability for the sake of dignity. Fear twisted in her chest, but alongside it something else stirred. Respect. Mr. President, she said quietly, you are gambling not just with your life, but with all of ours. Traore looked at her with eyes that did not waver. Then let me carry the risk. Leaders must pay the price. Not the people. The words struck her harder than any economic chart ever had. She lowered her gaze, torn between dread and loyalty. Zongo was not convinced. When the sanctions hit, when markets close, when bread vanishes from stalls, what will you tell the mothers who cannot feed their children? Traore's answer was sharp. I will tell them the truth, that for 70 years they have lived hungry, not because of me, but because of the chains of Paris. And I will tell them this hunger is different. It is the hunger before a harvest, not the hunger of slavery. The room grew quiet again. Ministers exchanged uneasy glances. They could not deny the truth in his words, but truth did not silence fear. Outside the palace, Ouagadougou was waking. Motorbikes sputtered through dusty streets. Vendors laid out vegetables under the rising sun. Families prepared tea, unaware that history was being rewritten only a few blocks away. In the hum of ordinary life, no one yet knew they were about to be called to witness a rebellion unlike any before. Oned entered quickly, his breath short. Mr. President, he said, the broadcast is ready. The cameras are waiting. Every eye turned toward Traore. This was the moment ministers had dreaded. Planning in secret was one thing, but to speak openly, to announce the death of the CFA franc that would cross the point of no return. For a long moment, he stood in silence. He slipped a hand into his pocket, feeling the cool weight of the prototype coin. It pressed against his palm like a reminder, solid and unyielding. He looked at each minister in turn, memorizing their faces pale with fear, shadowed with doubt, flickering with reluctant hope. Then, with the faintest of smiles, he spoke. It is time. The people heard the truth. He turned and walked toward the door, the sound of his boots echoing against the marble floor. The ministers sat frozen, knowing they were about to step into history willingly or not. And in the silence he left behind, one thought hung unspoken. Once the words leave his mouth, there will be no turning back. The cameras hummed softly, their red lights glowing in the early morning stillness. It was 6:30 a.m. Across Burkina Faso, families were preparing breakfast, children rubbing sleep from their eyes, vendors setting up stalls, drivers warming their engines, radios crackled in kitchens, televisions flickered in living rooms. And then suddenly, the nation's attention froze. On every screen, in every cafe, Ibrahim Traoré appeared, dressed in his military uniform, cap steady on his head, shoulders square, eyes burning with calm determination. He did not smile. He did not bow. He stood as if the entire weight of history pressed against his back. And yet he remained unbroken. People of Burkina Faso, he began, his voice clear, carried on the morning air like a bell. I appear before you in these early hours to share the truth. Last night, French banks and Western institutions launched economic war against us. They froze our money. They cancelled our loans. They sought to strangle our future. Across the capital, people leaned closer to their screens. In cramped apartments, in roadside stalls, in the homes of farmers far from the city, men and women listened in silence. You know why they did this. Traoré continued, his tone sharpened, cutting like a blade. Because we demand independence, because we demand control of our resources, because we say Burkina Faso belongs to the Burkinabe. He reached into his pocket and drew the prototype coin, lifting it into the light. The camera zoomed in. The map of Burkina glimmered. The baobab spread its branches like a promise. From today, we end the use of the colonial currency, the CFA franc. We begin our own money, Burkina gold. A currency backed by 100% of our own gold. Real value drawn from our own land. A murmur rose in the cafes. In one, a young man whispered, "Is it possible?" An elder beside him clenched his fist. "At last," he said, voice trembling. Then Traore held up a mobile phone. The camera caught the screen glowing with a simple app. And this is the Burkina digital wallet. Every citizen will receive it. You no longer need foreign banks. Your gold will be in your hands. Secure, transparent, untouchable by Paris. Some gasped in disbelief. Others stared with hope. In a village hut, an old farmer whispered, "I cannot read these phones. His grandson smiled. "I will teach you, grandfather. Your money will be safe at last." Traore's voice grew firmer. "Do not fear. All money in your CFA accounts will be converted into Burkina gold at twice the value. No one will lose. Everyone will gain. For the first time, your wealth will not be drained across the sea. It will stay where it belongs with you." In markets, women clasped hands in astonishment. In homes, men looked at their wives with tearful eyes. Whispers grew into cries of joy, the sound of disbelief, turning slowly into pride. "This is not the end of our struggle," Traore said. "It is the beginning. But know this, we are not alone." The screen flickered. Suddenly, the image split into 6 boxes. Beside Traore appear 5 other faces. The leaders of Mali, Niger, Guinea, Togo, and Benin. Each stood in their own offices, each wearing their nation's colors, each looking directly into the camera. Together, they spoke, voices overlapping across borders. "We too leave the CFA franc. We too take back our money. We too choose freedom." Gasps erupted across West Africa. In Bamako, Niamey, Conakry, Lomé, Cotonou, millions watched their screens in shock. It was not one nation standing alone. It was 6. In Ouagadougou, people spilled from cafes into the streets, lifting their phones high, showing the glowing app to strangers. Some shouted, some wept. For the first time in living memory, Africans saw more than defiance. They saw unity. Inside the palace, ministers stared at the broadcast, their fear drowned by the magnitude of what they had just unleashed. And in Paris, screens lit up with emergency alerts. A banker whispered, voice trembling. 6 countries, all at once. Back in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré looked into the camera, his expression unshaken. "This is not revolution," he said. "This is evolution, the final step of independence. Today, Africa begins anew." The broadcast froze on his face, determined, unyielding, defiant. And across continents, from dusty villages to marble boardrooms, the world understood. A line had been crossed. The split screen held steady. 6 faces, staring back at millions. In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré stood like a general at the front line. Beside him, one after another, the leaders of Mali, Niger, Guinea, Togo, and Benin appeared, différents uniformes, different accents, but the same fire in their eyes. It was a sight no one expected to see, not even Paris. President Goïta of Mali spoke first, his voice firm. "We too reject the CFA franc. We join Burkina Faso in choosing gold over chains." From Niamey, Niger's leader added, "For decades we exported uranium to light Europe's cities, yet our children studied by candlelight. Today, that insult ends." The camera shifted to Guinea. "Our rivers, Ubuntu, our people's sweat all paid in a currency that was never ours. Enough. We reclaim our dignity." Togo's president leaned forward, speaking with quiet conviction. "For too long, we were told unity was impossible. Look at us now. 6 voices, 1 message." Finally, from Cotonou, Benin's leader raised his hand. "We leave, not in anger, but in clarity. No more illusions. No more foreign masters. We choose Africa." The effect was electric. In Bamako, Sophie erupted. Men leapt from their chairs, slamming fists against tables, shouting independence. Women ululated in the streets, their voices piercing the morning sky. In Niamey, students gathered in university courtyards, waving phones with the new app glowing like torches. "No more CFA. No more CFA," they chanted, their voices rolling across campus like thunder. Conakry's markets buzzed with disbelief. Traders stopped haggling, staring at radios. One woman selling fish wept openly. "All my life I sold for nothing. Maybe my children will sell for something real." In Lomé, taxi drivers honked in unison, forming convoys through the streets. Flags waved from car windows. "Finally, our money is ours," shouted one driver, tears streaming down his face as strangers cheered. In Cotonou, church bells rang without warning. Priests stepped into the streets, blessing the crowd as people lifted their hands in gratitude. "This is God's justice," someone cried. The wave spread like fire across the region. In villages where televisions were rare, neighbors crowded into a single house to watch. In towns, loudspeakers carried the broadcast through dusty streets. Everywhere, one message repeated, "We are free." But freedom is never without fear. Not everyone celebrated. In each country, there were whispers of doubt. "What if the West punishes us?" asked one shopkeeper in Niamey. "What if the shelves go empty?" murmured a teacher in Lomé. The fear was real. The memories of famine and embargo still raw. Yet even fear could not silence the pride swelling in people's chests. For the first time, they saw their leaders united, speaking with one voice. Not begging in foreign capitals, but declaring on their own soil. Inside Ouagadougou's palace, the ministers watched the broadcast with disbelief. Zongo's lips were pressed tight, as though trying to hold back panic. "It is not only us now," he whispered. "It is all of them. If this fails, we bring down half of West Africa." Dr. Konate, by contrast, sat straighter than before. For years, she had signed documents tethered to Paris. Now, she felt something stir deep inside, something she had buried beneath caution. Pride. Traore's eyes did not leave the screen. "They thought we would stand alone," he said softly. They were wrong. In the streets outside, the broadcast ended, but the echo remained. Strangers embraced. Children ran with flags. Old men lifted their fists skyward, whispering Sankara's name as if he had returned. The world was shifting, and everyone could feel it. But while Africa cheered, Europe trembled. Far away in Paris, in the stone halls of the French central bank, alarms rang, screens flashed red, phones shrieked. An official slammed his fist against the desk. 6 countries. 6. All at once. The governor of the bank, pale and furious, barked, "Get me the Ministry of Finance. Now, we must act immediately." An aide's voice broke through the chaos. "Sir, the wallets. They are being downloaded by the millions. There is no run on banks. The people are accepting this." The governor's face drained of color. Impossible. But the numbers on the screen told the truth. Africa was no longer waiting. The marble halls of the Banque de France had never known such chaos. Screens blazed with graphs dropping like stones, flashing alerts in red. Phones rang over one another, voices overlapping in panic. For decades, this building had been the quiet heart of Africa's money. Now, it felt like a fortress under siege. An official from the Africa desk, his tie loosened, shouted across the room, 6 countries. Not 1, not 2, 6. All at once. Mali, Niger, Guinea, Togo, Benin, Burkina Faso. They've walked out together. The governor of the central bank slammed his fist on the table. His usually polished tone cracked with rage. "This is sabotage. A coup against the very foundations of our financial order. They cannot do this. They cannot survive without us." A younger analyst muttered, half to himself, "They already are." He pointed at the screen. Figures rolled upward, not downward. Millions of downloads. The Burkina digital wallet was spreading faster than anyone predicted. Entire populations were adopting the gold-backed app overnight. No bank runs, no panits.
Dust.
Acceptance.
The capital.
The room
Students
fell into stunned
swept
silence.
shoulder to shoulder
For decades,
with street vendors.
Western institutions had
Doctors
relied on
helped
one
clean
rule:
the very clinics
fear.
they worked in.
If Africans dared to step outside the CFA franc, fear would bring them crawling back. But here was a new reality. Fear was losing. The silence broke when a senior advisor grabbed the phone. "Get me the Ministry of Finance." And Brussels. And Washington. Immediately. Within minutes. Secure lines buzzed. The French finance minister's voice filled the room, sharp and impatient. "Tell me it is contained." "It is not," the governor replied, his voice strained. They coordinated. They planned this in secret. Their minds are seized. Their currency launched. And the people are embracing it. This is not collapse. It is momentum. A pause. Then the minister's voice hardened. "Then we cut them off. Full sanctions. Energy. Medicine. Trade. Make them feel the price of defiance." From Brussels, An EU commissioner joined the call, her tone clipped. We cannot afford another contagion. If West Africa slips, Central Africa may follow. Act quickly, freeze all reserves, suspend all transfers, shut down access to European markets. In Washington, the reaction was colder, more calculated. A senior Treasury official warned, if gold-backed currency spreads, if digital wallets bypass the dollar, this could destabilize more than Africa. It could reach Latin America, even Asia. This is not an African problem. It is a global threat. The governor wiped his forehead. We warned them for years. We told them independence was suicide, but they call it liberation. A journalist's voice carried from a television in the corner, reporting live. Economic collapse begins in Africa. The anchor declared, 6 nations abandon the CFA franc. Experts predict famine, riots, and the total collapse of financial order. The footage showed shaky clips of Ouagadougou streets, carefully framed to look chaotic. The truth that people were calm, downloading the app was ignored. Instead, Western media painted apocalypse, hoping fear might spread faster than gold. Yet inside the halls of power, the panic was not feigned. Aida burst in, holding a report. Sir, the withdrawals, there are none. Instead, we see confidence. Small traders in Bamako are already accepting the Burkina gold. Market vendors in Niamey use the app. Conakry, Lomé, Cotonou, same story. There is no collapse. There is adaptation. The governor's face twisted. Fury, masking, fear. This is impossible. Africans do not move this fast. Someone is behind this. Someone powerful. The minister's voice cut through the noise. Then we will remind them who holds the real power. Announce sanctions. Today, before the sun sets. The room erupted again. Arguments, warnings, frantic calls to embassies. Some officials insisted sanctions would backfire, driving the Africans deeper into new alliances. Others demanded harsher measures. Block fuel, medicine, close borders. Threaten aid. But the decision was made. The word sanctions was written in ink before the debate even began. In Ouagadougou, dawn was still fresh. People filled markets, phones glowing with the new wallet. Pride was swelling, fragile but real. And far away in Paris, powerful men in marble rooms swore they would crush it. The governor lifted his phone once more, his hand trembling slightly. Contact the Élysée. Tell the president it has begun. Africa is slipping. And if we do not act now, we will lose them forever. By midday, the announcements came like thunderclaps. From Washington, from Brussels, from Paris. Each statement colder than the last. Sanctions, suspension of aid, termination of agreements. The words echoed across news channels, repeated until they blurred into a single command. Punish them. The IMF struck first. Its spokesperson, face pale behind the podium, declared, all loan disbursements to Burkina Faso and its partners are frozen until they return to stability. Cooperation is impossible. The World Bank followed, citing reckless policy decisions. Brussels announced restrictions on trade access. Washington called the move a danger to regional peace. Western media took the cue. Headlines screamed catastrophe. Africa on the brink. Suicide of a continent. Anchors in London, Paris, and New York shook their heads gravely. Warning of riots. Famine? Collapse. Behind them, screens, rolled footage, old clips of empty shelves, protests in unrelated countries, children cowing for bread. None of it current, but all of it designed to terrify. Yet on African soil, life told a different story. In Ouagadougou's Central Market, the smell of spices and roasted maize filled the air. Women haggled over tomatoes. Men carried sacks of grain on their backs. Children darted between stalls. Phones glowed in their hands. The Burkina digital wallet lighting up screens. A young woman buying onions tapped her screen, sending a payment in seconds. The vendor gasped, then laughed, holding up his own phone. It is real. It works. Cheers rippled across the stalls. In a roadside cafe, the television blared with Western warnings of collapse within days. The men gathered around, chuckled bitterly. One lifted his phone. Collapse. Then why is my balance here? Why can I buy my tea without a bank? He raised his glass. And the others joined. Toasting defiance. Far from the capital, in a quiet village, elders sat beneath a baobab tree. Their grandchildren placed phones in their hands, guiding wrinkled fingers across glowing screens. Press here. Grandfather. The old man pressed, and numbers appeared. He gasped, clutching the device. So they cannot freeze this. The boy smiled proudly. No, it is yours. The elder's eyes filled with tears. Then today, I am free. Inside the presidential palace, ministers crowded around a screen streaming foreign news. Bold words scrolled. Starvation imminent. Burkina Faso isolated. Zongo's face was pale. Do you see? They are already poisoning the narrative. The world will believe we are starving even while we eat. Investors will flee. Allies will hesitate. At the window, Captain Ibrahim Traoré looked down on the city. The streets bustled as usual, motorbikes weaving, children laughing, women balancing baskets on their heads. He turned back, his voice like steel. They speak of collapse because they fear what they see. And what they see is calm, pride, freedom. Dr. Amina Konate adjusted her glass, voice cautious but heavy. Sanctions will still bite. Imports will tighten. Prices will rise. We cannot pretend otherwise. Traore stepped forward. Yes, Amina. But look again. Do you see panic? Do you see riots? No. You see discovery? You see people learning to own what is theirs. They have tasted freedom. And once tasted, it cannot be untasted. Her hands trembled slightly. She had once preached stability through Paris. Yet now she saw true stability in the quiet confidence of market women, in the laughter of children teaching their elders. For the first time, she wondered if freedom itself was the most stable foundation of all. The door burst open. An aide rushed in, clutching a tablet. Mr. President, urgent. On the screen, a map of Africa glowed with tiny lights. Numbers climbed rapidly. Downloads, registrations, transactions. 6 million, 7, 8. Each figure higher than the last. At first, the lights clustered in Burkina Faso and its 5 allies. But then, new sparks blinked on Accra in Ghana, Dakar in Senegal, Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire, Kinshasa in Congo. Further still, Nairobi, Johannesburg, and beyond Africa itself. Dots glowed in Paris, Brussels, London. Members of the diaspora downloading the app, declaring solidarity. Zongo stared in disbelief. This is madness. Why would they? Konate cut him off, her voice firm now. Because hunger for dignity knows no borders. They see freedom here, and they want it too. The ministers fell silent, each grappling with the scale of what they were witnessing. What began as a gamble for one nation had become a movement for millions. Traore took the tablet, staring at the glowing constellation of lights. His reflection flickered on the screen, framed by the fire he had lit. He spoke softly, almost to himself. They thought sanctions would cage us. Instead, they have unchained us. He set the tablet down. Outside, the city hummed with ordinary life. Inside, history pulsed louder with every second. The question was no longer whether Burkina Faso could survive sanctions. The question was how far this fire would spread. The village had been restless since dawn. Word had spread along the dusty roads that the president was coming. Mothers pulled children close, whispering. Young men argued outside the tea stalls, some mocking, others curious. Why would he come here? To us. One scoffed. Politicians only arrive when they want votes. An old woman spat into the dirt. Or when they want to lie. Still, the people gathered. By the time the convoy rolled in, the entire village was pressed into the square beneath the ancient baobab. Silence settled like a heavy cloak. For many, it was the first time they had seen a head of state with their own eyes. Ibrahim Traoré stepped down from the jeep without ceremony. No stage. No microfones. No guards. Just him, uniform dusty from travel, boots crunching on gravel. He walked directly into the crowd. The villagers parted slowly, eyes sharp with suspicion. At the front stood a farmer. His frame was gaunt, his spine bent by decades of tilling stubborn land. His palms were hard, split by years of holding tools, worn smooth. In his hand he clutched a cheap phone, screen flickering faintly. When the president reached him, the farmer did not bow. He lifted the phone, his voice steady, though lined with bitterness. "Mr. President," he began. "They say, this small box carries my money. But I have seen money vanish. I saved for years, and still the bank swallowed it. When Paris gave the order, I buried 2 sons who left for Europe because here, their labor was worth nothing. And now you say this will protect us, that this box will set us free." The crowd stirred. Some muttered in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably. Doubt weighed heavy in the air. Traore did not speak. Instead, he lowered himself onto the ground. Sitting cross-legged in the dust at the farmer's feet, gasps rippled through the villagers. A president in the dirt. Such a sight belonged more to fables than to politics. "Father," he said at last, his tone gentle, "your doubt is not weakness. It is wisdom. They have stolen from you too many times. Why should you trust me today? You should not. Trust only what you see." He reached out and steadied the farmer's hand, guiding his rough thumb across the screen. The app opened, numbers glowing in golden light. The old man blinked, his breath catching. This is mine." "Yes," Traore said firmly, "backed by gold from our soil. No banker in Paris can freeze it. No president in Washington can erase it. Not even I can take it from you. It is yours." The farmer's lips trembled. He turned the phone over, as though expecting the numbers to vanish. When they did not, his knees buckled. He fell to the ground, clutching the phone to his chest. Tears carved lines through the dust on his cheeks. "For the first time," he whispered, his voice breaking, "my labor cannot be stolen." The words struck the crowd like thunder. Women wailed in joy, ululating, until their cries pierced the sky. Children danced, clapping in rhythm. Men lifted their fists, shouting Traore's name. Some fell to their knees in prayer. Others wept openly. The air vibrated with something larger than relief. It was released 70 years of chains cracking all at once. Traore Rosse, raising his hand for silence. His voice carried like a drumbeat. "This is why we fight. Not for ministers, not for palaces, for this. For the farmer who must never again fear losing the fruit of his labor. For the child who must grow, knowing his future is his own." The people surged forward. Mothers pressed bread into his hands. Fathers gripped his arms. Children touched his sleeves, as if to make sure he was real. For once, power was not distant. It sat in the dirt among them, guiding, trembling hands toward freedom. On the edge of the square, unnoticed, a man raised a small camera. A foreign journalist, long dismissed as irrelevant, had captured everything: the tears, the cries, the dust rising like incense. By evening, the footage was online. In Ouagadougou, students huddled around laptops, watching the farmer whisper, "My labor cannot be stolen." In Dakar, young men shared the clip across cafes, pounding tables in solidarity. In Nairobi, girls in school uniforms played it again and again, whispering, "We want this too." Across the diaspora, in cramped Paris apartments, Africans watched with burning eyes. One young worker showed the video to his French colleagues. "This is my president," he said proudly. But the West saw differently. The same clip played on European networks, framed with scorn. Anchors smirked. Staged theater. One said, "Cheap propaganda to mask collapse." Another laughed. A president playing peasant to fool his people. The numbers tell a darker truth. Dos narrativas. 2 battles. One square in a forgotten village had become the stage of a global war of stories, and as the clip spread faster than any sanction, one question crackled through phones and radios. From dusty huts to glass towers, who would the world believe: the voices in Paris, or the tears of a farmer in the dirt? The video of the farmer spread faster than any speech, faster than any decree. By dawn, it had reached every corner of Burkina Faso. By midday, it was blazing through West Africa. By nightfall, it circled the globe. One clip, An old man clutching a phone, whispering, "My labor cannot be stolen." And beside him, a president in uniform, sitting in the dust. In Bamako, coffee erupted. Young men watched on cracked televisions, slamming fists on tables, shouting, "Burkina, Mali is with you." In Conakry, women in markets raised their phones, chanting, "Our gold, our hands, our future." In Dakar, thousands of students projected the video on university walls, singing freedom songs late into the night. For them, this was not just Burkina Faso's moment, it was Africa's. But in Paris, the same clip was mocked. A French anchor smirked. A well-rehearsed play. Notice how the camera captures every tear. Pure theater. In Washington, a panel of analysts chuckled. A peasant with a smartphone wallet. Next week they'll claim goats are trading on blockchain. Laughter filled the studio, but the undertone was fear. The war of narratives had begun. Inside a secure room in Paris, intelligence officers leaned over glowing screens. Charts tracked hashtags. Maps pulsed with downloads of the Burkina wallet. Red spikes lit up across the continent. "This is dangerous," one officer muttered. "It's no longer about currency. It's about pride. And pride spreads faster than numbers." Another officer tapped his pen. "Then we break it. Plant a story. Leak rumors that the wallet is unsafe. If they believe it can be hacked, the trust collapses." The director nodded slowly. Fear travels faster than hope. Do it. Within 24 hours, headlines appeared. Burkina wallet, hacked, millions at risk. Gold reserves stolen by unknown group. No evidence. No details, but repeated until it sounded true. Western anchors delivered the lines with grave voices. African radio stations, uncertain, replayed the rumors. In Ouagadougou, a woman in the market whispered to her neighbor, "They say the app is broken, that the gold is gone." Her neighbor frowned at her screen. "But look, my money is still here." Yet doubt Lingel. In Niamey, a teacher told his students to be cautious. "Do not trust everything on these phones. One click and all may vanish." In Lomé, taxi drivers argued at a cafe. "The West lies," shouted one. "But what if it's true?" replied another. Fear seeped like smoke, invisible yet choking. Inside the palace, ministers erupted in argument. Zongo pounded the table. "I warned you, they will twist everything. Already the people doubt." Koneti shook her head, her voice firm. "Then we fight with transparency. Show them the system. Prove it works." Traore listened in silence. He had seen this weapon before. Not bombs, not guns, but stories. The invisible war where words killed more surely than bullets. He turned to his ministers. "Do you see? They cannot beat us with economics, so they fight with fear. Then we answer, not with speeches, but with proof." Konete leaned forward. "What do you propose?" "Live demonstration." Traore said, "Every citizen must see their wallet, tested and secure, before their eyes. No Parisian banker. No. American anchor will decide the truth. Our people will." The ministers exchanged uneasy glances. Such a move was bold, risky. If anything went wrong, the damage would be permanent. But if it succeeded, at that moment, on Ida Burstin, clutching a tablet, "Mr. President, international media demand interviews. They say the world wants answers." Traore jaw tightened. He took the tablet, staring at the glowing map. Downloads kept rising. 10 million, 12, 14. And not only in Africa, dots blinked in Paris. London, New York, diaspora Africans quietly downloading, showing solidarity. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "They think rumors will strangle us. They forget. A lie must be hidden. But truth, once shown, spreads like fire." He raised his head, eyes burning. "Prepare the broadcast. Tonight, we fight, not with guns, not with sanctions, but with truth against lies." The ministers fell silent. They had entered a new battlefield, and as the city's lights flickered on, painting Ouagadougou gold against the dark, Ibrahim Traoré prepared for his next war. A war of stories, Night fell heavy over Ouagadougou. The streets glowed with kerosene lamps and the blue light of mobile screens. People gathered in cafes, courtyards, and village squares, whispering about the rumors. Was the wallet hacked? Had their gold vanished into thin air? Fear clung to conversations like smoke. Inside the presidential palace, tension was thicker still. Cameras were being prepared. Engineers checked connections, servers, security systems. This was no ordinary speech. This was war on another front, the war of perception. Traore sat quietly at the head of the table, his ministers arrayed around him. Some were pale with doubt, others restless with energy. Konate leaned forward, speaking in a low but steady voice. Mr. President, this must be flawless. If even one glitch appears, they will magnify it across the world. Zongo scoffed. And if it fails, the people will turn against us. Better silence than humiliation. Traore's gaze cut through him like a blade. Silence is death. Words are their weapons. Tonight, we answer. He stood and walked toward the studio. The air buzzed with nervous energy. Technicians nodded quickly, confirming everything was ready. Lights flickered on. The red camera light glowed. At exactly 9 p.m., the broadcast began. Across Burkina Faso, across West Africa, even across diasporas in Europe, screens came alive with the image of the president. He did not sit behind a desk. He stood, sleeves rolled, phone in hand. People of Burkina Faso, he began, his tone clear and direct. They say our wallet is broken. They say our gold is gone. They spread lies because they cannot bear the truth that for the first time in 70 years, our money is ours. He lifted his phone for the camera. The screen glowed. Tonight, I will show you. This is my wallet. The same as yours. Watch closely. He tapped the screen. The app opened. His balance appeared measured in Burkina gold. The camera zoomed in. No tricks. No cuts. I will send money now. Traore continued. To a farmer in Bobo Dioulasso, he waits with his phone. Watch. He entered the number. Pressed. Send. For a heartbeat. Silence. Then a second screen appeared. Live feed of the farmer. Phone in hand. A ping sounded. His eyes widened. Numbers appeared on his screen. He raised it high, shouting, "It is here. It is real." The crowd around him erupted in cheers. In Ouagadougou, people watching on televisions clapped and shouted. In villages, elders leaned closer to radios, their grandchildren translating the words, "Across the border." In Mali and Niger, Tofish erupted. The transfer had worked fast, secure, undeniable. But Traore was not finished. They said our reserves are gone. Lies. He gestured to Konate, who stepped into view holding documents. Here are our audited reserves, published tonight, visible to every citizen. No Parisian accountant. No foreign zeal. Only ours. The camera cut to graphs, figures, signed statements, transparency, in real time. And finally, Traore said, his voice firm, they said our system could be hacked. Tonight, we open it to the world. Engineers are streaming the code live. Every programmer, every expert may examine it. If it fails, let it fail before your eyes. If it stands, then know this. Our freedom is stronger than their lies. The broadcast rolled on. Engineers explained the blockchain, demonstrated security checks. Ordinary people were invited to test transfers. The system held firm. No glitch, no collapse. By the end, the doubt that had clouded markets was lifting. Cheers echoed through streets. Strangers huggle, showing one another their balances with pride. But in Paris, the reaction was fury. In a television studio, a commentator slammed his papers. This is theater, a circus. It proves nothing. But his voice shook, betraying unease. In Washington, a Treasury official muttered off camera. Damn it. It's working. The duel of broadcasts had ended, and Africa, for once, had won. Back in the palace, ministers exhaled in relief. Even Zongo, still skeptical, admitted quietly, the people believe again. But Traore did not smile. He looked into the distance, his eyes shadowed. This was only the first battle. They will strike harder now. Tonight we won the air. Outside, the chants of citizens filled the night. Burkina, Burkina, and in hidden offices in Paris and Washington, new plans were already unfolding. Morning broke over Ouagadougou with a strange electricity. The air itself seemed alive. The night before, millions had watched their president defy the world in a live broadcast. And now the city pulsed with new confidence. Children went to school, humming chants they had heard in the streets. Vendors at the market displayed not just their goods but their phones, showing off balances in glowing gold. Yet beneath the joy, shadows stirred. On street corners, whispers spread. The French will not forgive this. They will come with soldiers. Sanctions are only the beginning. Fear and pride collided in conversations, like two rivers struggling to merge. By noon, the tension spilled into the open. A march began near Independence Square. Students, traders, workers carrying banners painted with bold words. Our gold, our future. Drums echoed down the boulevards, feet stamping in rhythm. Within hours, the crowd swelled into tens of thousands, a tide of humanity filling the streets. From balconies, women waved cloths in the colors of the nation. Taxi drivers honked horns in unison. Children clambered onto shoulders, shouting, "No more CFA." But not everyone celebrated. In the shadows, agents moved quietly. Men trained abroad, slipping through the crowd with purpose. They carried not guns, but envelopes of cash. Their mission? To turn celebration into chaos. At one corner, a group of young men argued heatedly. "We march for freedom," one said. Another sneered, pocketing. A note slipped into his hand. "Freedom," or "Hunger. When prices rise, you'll regret this gold fantasy." He hurled a stone at a shop window. Glass shattered. Panic rippled. The agent smiled. Disorder was their weapon. Back at the palace, reports flooded in. Zongo paced furiously. "Do you see? Already the streets descend into madness. This is how revolutions collapse, cheers turning to riots." Konate shook her head. "No, this is provocation. Imported case." Traore listened in silence. He knew the signs. He had studied the patterns of coups and uprisings across Africa, how foreign hands lit small fires until nations burned. His jaw tightened. "Send word to the commanders. Protect the people. Do not shoot. The world is watching. If we spill blood, they win." In the streets, soldiers arrived, forming human chains, not with weapons raised, but with arms outstretched, guiding crowds back from provocateurs. The students responded first, chanting, "The army with the people with the army." Trust, fragile but real, spread like oxygen. Still, the saboteurs pressed harder. More stones, more shouts. Someone lit a torch, thrusting it toward a shop. But before it caught flame, a circle of women surrounded the man, beating pots and pans, driving him back with cries of, "Not here, not today." The crowd roared, approval. The turning point had come. What could have spiraled into chaos instead hardened into unity. By dusk, the marchers filled the square before the palace, singing, waving phones lit like candles. From the balcony above, Traore stepped out. The roar of the crowd rose like thunder. He raised his hand for silence. "My brothers, my sisters," he called. "They tried to turn your joy into fear. They sent whispers, lies, even money to break you. But look around. Are you broken? No." The crowd roared. "Are you afraid? No. Then know this. Our strength is not in palaces or armies. It is in the streets. It is in the farmer with his phone, the mother with her child, the student with her voice. They cannot defeat us because we are already awake. And once awake, Africa does not sleep again." The square shook with chants. Burkina, Africa, freedom. Phones rose high, their golden screens glowing in the night. Inside the palace, Konate whispered to Zongo, "Do you see? The people are no longer watching. They are living this revolution." But Zongo's face remained tense, and that is exactly what makes us most vulnerable. Far away, in Paris and Washington, Satellite feeds carried the images, tens of thousands chanting, soldiers standing peacefully among them, phones glowing like fireflies. Analysts frowned. This was not chaos. This was order, forged from defiance. And somewhere, in the quiet halls of power, men made decisions. If the streets will not collapse, one voice said coldly, then we will strike elsewhere. The chants of the march still echoed in Ouagadougou, but beneath the surface another current was moving, cold, silent, and deadly. It did not shout in the streets or paint slogans on walls. It whispered in barracks, traded envelopes in alleys, and crept like smoke into the very heart of the army. In Paris, a minister leaned across a polished desk. Demonstrations of unity. Soldiers refusing to fire. This cannot stand. His advisor's voice was sharp, almost gleeful. Then we do what has always been done. We cut off the head, fund a faction, sow suspicion, let ambition do the rest. A coup. The word dropped like poison. For decades, it had been the bluntest tool of control. Why invade when you could buy generals? Within days, strange tremors reached the palace. A colonel suddenly drove a new car. Captains were seen meeting in private, with shadowy businessmen at hotel bars. Phones rang at odd hours. Conversations hushed when loyalists entered. The whispers were always the same. Remove him, and Paris will forgive. Remove him, and Washington will reward. Remove him, and you will rise. One evening, Konate entered the president's office, with a file clutched tightly in her hands. Her voice was low but urgent. Mr. President, our intelligence confirms it. At least 7 officers have been approached. Money, promises, even threats to their families. The seeds are there. Zongo slammed his palm on the table. I told you this would happen. They will never let us breathe. Sanctions failed. Rumors failed. Now they come for our own men. This is the end. Traore's eyes burned. No, Zongo. This is not the end. This is the test. That night he summoned his commanders. In the war room, maps lay spread. Names circled in red ink. An intelligence officer pointed grimly. These men were offered bribes. Some refused. Others, we cannot say. Traore leaned over the map. If we strike at them, we fracture the army. If we stay silent, they may strike at us. Silence weighed on the room. The choices were knives, each sharp in its own way. Meanwhile, in the barracks, unease festered. Young soldiers whispered over rations. The president is bold, but boldness brings hunger. They say France will open the borders if we change leaders. A sergeant warned, keep your voice down, or tomorrow you'll be gone. Trust, once fragile, now frayed like rope under strain. Ordinary people felt it too. In markets, women stored extra millet. Fathers told sons to avoid the city center. One old man muttered, I saw this before. 1987. Sankara was betrayed by his own. Beware, it begins the same way. One evening, a gunshot cracked outside the palace gates. Guards scrambled, weapons raised. A lone soldier had fired into the night. Accident. Warning. No one knew, but fear rippled through the corridors. It was no longer rumor. The coup was at the threshold. Leaflets appeared by dawn. Your president gambles with your lives. Gold is gone. Trust is gone. Radio stations played a leaked recording claiming Traore planned to flee with reserves. Western newspapers declared, Burkina faces internal revolt. Ministers shouted in endless meetings. Some demanded mass arrests. Others urged negotiation. Konate pressed for transparency, but her hands shook. Zongo muttered constantly about collapse. Through it all, Traore sat silent, watching, alone at night. He stared at the gold coin on his desk. He whispered into the darkness, they killed you with bullets. Sankara, they will try the same with me. But if I fall, let the fire not die. Beyond the palace, the city held its breath. Shopkeepers glanced nervously at passing convoys. Mothers sent children indoors at dusk. Youth debated heatedly on café. If they overthrow him, do we stay silent? Or do we flood the streets again? The atmosphere thickened, heavy with suspicion. Officers vanished from duty. Trucks of soldiers moved at night without orders. Messages flew through encrypted apps. Be ready. The moment is near. The stage was set. Foreign capitals waited with cold patience. Disloyal officers sharpened their knives of ambition. Loyalists braced for betrayal. And the people, weary yet defiant, whispered prayers that history would not repeat its cruelest cycle. For the battle over money had turned into something older, darker. The battle for power itself. And in Africa, such battles were not fought in daylight. They began in the shadows until the first gunfire broke the silence. The night was heavy, pressing down on Ouagadougou like a suffocating blanket. The city seemed restless, as if it knew danger was crawling through its streets. Dogs barked without reason. Radios played low. Nervous voices trading rumors. Soldiers patrolled, their boots crunching gravel, eyes darting at every shadow. Inside the palace, Ibrahim Traoré sat at his desk. The gold coin, prototype, glinting faintly under lamplight. He rolled it between his fingers. Its weight, both comfort and curse. Konaté entered quietly. Exhaustion etched into her face. Mr. President, she whispered. Reports from the barracks. Movements without orders. Vehicles leaving in the dark. Officers missing from roll call. Traore did not look up. It begins tonight. Zongo burst in moments later. Panic in his voice. We must flee. It's the only way. If they storm this palace, you will do as Sankara did. Traore's eyes snapped up. Fire blazing. If I flee, the dream dies with me. If they kill me here, at least the people will know I stood my ground. The minutes dragged like hours. Then, at 1:12 a.m., the first gunshot cracked through the night. Not in the palace, but near the eastern barracks. Shouts followed. Then engines roared. Armored vehicles. Trucks filled with soldiers racing toward the city center. Inside the palace, alarms wailed. Guards sprinted to positions. Rifles raised. Ministers huddled in fear. Some whispering prayers. Others looking for exits. By one, Sancha. Bursts of automatic fire echoed closer. Windows rattled. Smoke rose in the distance. The coup was no longer shadow. It had come with steel. In the streets, citizens woke in terror. Mothers pulled children under beds. Fathers pressed ears to radios crackling with fragments. Gunfire near the barracks. Soldiers moving on the palace. Some men, emboldened, ran outside with sticks and stones, shouting, "We will not let them take him." The city was waking to fight. Even as the knives closed in, inside the palace, loyalist commanders rallied. Mr. President, the eastern barracks are split. Some march against us. Others hold firm. If we hold until dawn, reinforcements will come. Then we hold, Traoré said, strapping on his sidearm. I will not be dragged like a prisoner. If they enter, I fight. Konaté's voice trembled. At least move to the secure chamber. If you fall tonight, all we built falls too. He shook his head. The people must know I did not hide. Broadcast me. And so, at 2 a.m., while gunfire crackled outside, national television flickered to life. Traoré appeared on screen, calm, uniform sharp, though sweat beaded his brow. People of Burkina Faso, he said, his voice steady over the crackle of distant shots. Tonight, they come with knives and bullets. They think fear will end our dream. But listen, you can hear it outside. The sound of betrayal. Do not despair. Stand firm. If I fall tonight, you rise tomorrow. Do not bow again to Paris. Do not bow to lies. Stand. The transmission lasted less than 3 minutes before power flickered, but it was enough. Across the city, men and women who had hidden in fear now poured into the streets, banging pots, chanting, "Noku, Noku." The sound carried like thunder. Soldiers marching toward the palace slowed. Uneasy. Some lowered rifles. Others turned back. By 3 a.m., fighting erupted within the army itself. Loyalists clashed with conspirators in alleyways, at roadblocks, even in courtyards where citizens joined with stones and sticks. The night became chaos, a storm of loyalty and betrayal. In the palace, the president's guard held the line. Shots rang out. Walls shook, but they did not break. By 5 a.m., a grey dawn crept over the city. Smoke hung heavy. Dozens lay wounded, a few dead. But the palace still stood. Traore, exhausted, yet unbowed, emerged onto the steps as the first light struck. Citizens gathered below, battered but chanting his name. The night of knives has ended. He declared hoarsely, but this war is not over. The crowd roared. But above the noise, a single truth lingered. The coup had failed for now. Yet in its failure, it revealed how far the enemy was willing to go. And everyone knew the next strike would be worse. When the sun finally rose, it revealed a city, bruised but still breathing. Smoke curled from burnt vehicles. Streets were littered with shattered glass, spent cartridges, and torn banners from the march. Mothers swept blood from their doorsteps. Children peered out from shuttered windows. The night of knives had ended, but its scars were carved deep into Ouagadougou. At the palace gates, bodies of fallen soldiers lay covered with cloth. Some wore the insignia of loyalists, others of conspirators. Their blood mingled in the dust, a cruel reminder that Burkina Faso's wounds were not only inflicted from abroad, they ran through its own veins. Inside the palace, the air smelled of gunpowder and sweat. Ministers sat in silence, their faces drawn and pale. Zongo spoke first, his voice thin. "We survived. But at what cost? Our army is split. Our streets are bleeding. The world will see this as weakness." Konate shook her head. No. The world saw a people rise. Citizens stood in the streets. Soldiers refused to betray. The palace held. That is not weakness. That is birth. Traore sat apart, his uniform torn, his eyes hollow from sleepless hours. He listened, but spoke little. At dawn, he had stood before the crowd, declaring victory. But in his heart, he knew victory was fragile. This was not an ending. It was an interlude. Later that morning, he walked alone through the city. Soldiers saluted. Citizens reached to touch his hand. Some even knelt as he passed, but he noticed the fear behind their cheers. Markets were open, yet hushed. Bread sellers counted coins nervously. Farmers arriving with goods muttered about rumors of another attack. The people had stood firm, but they were tired. How long could exhaustion carry hope? In the hospital, the cost was laid bare. Dozens of wounded soldiers groaned on narrow beds. Mothers wept beside sons, draped in bandages. One young fighter, barely 18, grabbed Traore's sleeve. "Mr. President, I did not run." His voice cracked. "Tell my mother I did not run." Tears filled Traore's eyes as he clasped the boy's hand. "You stood, and because of you, so does Burkina Faso." That evening, he returned to the palace. Advisors debated endlessly. Tighten control, purge the ranks, negotiate with foreign capitals. The noise was suffocating. Finally, Traore raised his hand. Silence fell. "Listen to me," he said, voice rough but steady. "Last night they tried to cut our throats. They failed, because our people refused to bow. This is not the end. It is the beginning. The night has passed. The dawn is here. But dawn brings a choice. Either we rise together, or we burn alone." Konate leaned forward. "And what of the traitors within our army?" Traore's jaw tightened. "Expose them, but not with vengeance. Show the people who sold their loyalty for foreign gold. Let the shame belong to them, not us. If we answer betrayal with blood, we become no better than those who betrayed Sankara." Os night fell again. Ouagadougou lit candles in windows. Families prayed for the dead, honored the wounded, and whispered to children that freedom was worth every sacrifice. The rumors of fear still lingered, but something new had begun to stir, resolve. Across Africa, the images traveled, citizens chanting against the coup, women driving saboteurs from the march, soldiers standing with the people. From Accra to Kinshasa, whispers turned into conversations. If they resisted Paris in Ouagadougou, why not here? In Western capitals, the tone grew darker. A failed coup meant their hand had been seen. Diplomats spoke in coded anger. The Burkinabe experiment must be contained before it infects the continent. But within Burkina Faso, something irreversible had happened. For the first time, people believed not only in their president, but in themselves. And as Traore stood once more on the palace balcony, looking at the city scarred yet unbroken, he whispered to the wind, "They tried to bury us in ashes, but from ashes comes dawn." The crowd below roared his name, their voices rising with the smoke of ruined vehicles and the glow of new hope. Yet even in that triumph, a shadow remained, because dawn was not peace. Dawn was only the prelude to the next battle. The city had returned to a fragile calm, but the silence was heavy with memory. Every street corner bore scars from the night of knives. Burned-out trucks stood like skeletons. Walls were pocked with bullet holes. Mothers carried water past the stains of blood that no rain could wash away. Burkina Faso had survived, but survival came at a price. In the palace courtyard, rows of coffins lay draped in national colours. Soldiers stood stiff, rifles at their sides, eyes fixed forward. Families wept quietly, clutching photographs of sons who would never come home. Some cursed the conspirators, others cursed Paris. One widow lifted her fist and shouted through her tears, "They thought killing you would kill the dream, but the dream lives in us now." Traore walked among them, stopping at each coffin. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. At one, he knelt, laying the golden coin prototype on the wood. "You did not fall for nothing," he whispered. "Your blood is the ink of our freedom." Later, in a closed meeting, Konate laid out the numbers. 79 dead. Over 200 wounded, half the eastern barracks compromised. And sanctions still choke our trade. We cannot pretend this struggle is without cost. Zongo exhaled sharply. The people are proud. Yes, but pride does not fill stomachs. Hunger will turn admiration into anger. Traore leaned forward. Then we show them the truth. We never promised an easy road. We promised a free one. And freedom is never free. That night, he addressed the nation. The broadcast was not triumphant. His voice was steady, almost solemn. "Brothers, sisters, last night we buried our children. We buried soldiers who stood loyal, farmers who defended their streets, mothers who shielded their sons. Their blood was not spilled in vain. It bought us another dawn. But dawn is not peace. It is work. It is sacrifice. And yes, it is suffering." He paused, eyes piercing the camera. The price of freedom is heavy. But ask yourself, is the price of chains lighter? Across the country, silence met his words. In villages, people sat around radios, some weeping, some nodding grimly. In markets, traders replayed his voice, murmuring, "He speaks truth. We suffer, but it is ours, not theirs." In Paris, the speech was mocked. "A commentators neared. Romantic nonsense. Soon they will beg for our aid." But in African cities, the opposite happened. Crowds replayed the clip on phones, chanting, "Freedom is never free." The phrase spread, painted on walls, whispered in sermons, carried in songs. Days turned into weeks. Food grew scarcer. Fuel prices rose. Lines at clinics lengthened. Yet something strange persisted. No riots. No collapse. Instead, solidarity deepened. Families shared what little they had. Neighbors cooked together, pooling rice and oil. In hardship, the people found each other. Konate marveled at it. Sanctions were meant to break us. Instead, they bind us tighter. But Traore knew the danger was not gone. Sanctions could grind a country slowly. Coups could return. And every night, he asked himself if the cost was too high. Yet, each morning, he saw new evidence that the people were learning to bear it. A farmer at market paying proudly with his wallet. A child telling his mother, "One day I will work in Burkina, not in Europe." The dream had survived knives, blood, hunger, but the price was etched on every face, every street. One evening, he met Sankara's widow. She looked at him with weary eyes, full of both sorrow and pride. "They killed my husband because he dared to dream. You carry his fire now. But remember, dreams do not come free. Are you ready to pay the price?" Traore held her gaze. "I have already begun." The next morning, he stood once more before the nation. Behind him were the coffins of the fallen. Before him, the people scarred, hungry, but unbroken. Last night proved a truth. The world tried to bury. He said that Africans can stand, that Africans can fight, that Africans can do not for foreign masters, but for themselves. The price of freedom is written here, in blood and tears, and we have paid it. We will keep paying it. But when our children walk free, they will know it was worth everything. The crowd roared not with joy, but with resolve. The sound was not celebration. It was defiance, raw and unyielding. Burkina Faso had entered a new era. The West had tested its will with sanctions, with lies, with knives. Each time, the people bent, but did not break. The dream of freedom had survived the fire, but freedom demanded more, always more, and as the nation buried its dead, one question haunted every heart. How much more must we give before Africa is truly free?